Well, hello, driver's ed students, and welcome to today's topic of discussion. We're going to be talking about strategy for driving. And specifically, there's a process known as the IPDE process. And we're going to break that down and talk about what it means, how to use it, and how it can help you be a better driver. So let's go ahead and get into today's discussion. So the IPDE process, it is an acronym. Let's get back to that. It stands for identify, predict, decide, and execute. And so those four steps are designed to help you be a safe driver. And safe driving depends upon your ability to correctly analyze traffic situations. A lot of people think being a good driver is all about how well you can perform things like turns or accelerating or braking. How good are you at changing lanes, stuff like that. And all of that stuff is really important, but that's not the only thing that makes a good driver. Your ability to look at what's going on around you and figure out what to do in each situation, that really is what makes you a good driver. And so let's talk about these four steps: identifying, predicting, deciding, executing, and how can we use those in the real world whenever we're out there driving around. So to start with, let's start with that first step: identify. So what are we looking for when we are driving? Well, we're going to be looking for specific clues. And I'm talking about clues that are specific to your driving task. There's all sorts of information that you're going to be gathering when you're driving, but not all of it is important to your driving task. The color of that Corvette that just passed you on the road, that's not important to your driving task. It might be interesting to you, but it's not important to your driving task. So the things that are important to your driving task are things like, what are the road conditions? Am I on a paved road or a gravel road? Is it wet? Is it dry? Is it icy? Those kinds of things. What other vehicles around? The color of those vehicles isn't important, but the presence of those vehicles is important. What kind of traffic controls are around? And here we're talking about things like stop signs and yield signs and traffic lights and all of that kind of stuff. The only way to gather the necessary information is to use a visual search pattern. You have to be looking around when you're driving. You cannot get tunnel vision. You can't have blinders on where you're not looking at the other stuff and you're only looking straight ahead. It's super important that you're developing a visual search pattern. And so the pattern that we always talk about is that you want to alternate between looking at the road ahead of you and one of the other things that you're supposed to look at. So, for example, you're going to look at the road ahead of you. You're going to glance at your rearview mirror. Then you're going to look back at the road ahead of you because you never want to look away from where you're driving for very long. So then you're going to you've just looked ahead. You've looked at your mirror. You look ahead again, and then you're going to check your side roads. And then you're going to look ahead again, and then you're going to check your speedometer, and then you're going to look ahead again, and then you're going to check your mirrors again. So you're just working on this visual search pattern of always alternating between what's ahead of you and one of the other pieces of information that you should be paying attention to. And so that is a good visual search pattern so that you always know what's going on. All right, so now that we understand what identifying is, and let me just go back real quick here. What are the things that we're focusing on identifying? We are focusing on identifying road conditions, other vehicles, and traffic controls. Road conditions, other vehicles, traffic controls. Three important things there. So what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at this picture right here. And I want you to think about identifying the three most important things to your driving task. Okay, there's way more than three things to identify here, but I want you to pick three that you feel are the most important. So go ahead and pause the video momentarily and just think about what three things you're going to pick. Okay, so let's see what you picked. you might have selected these other vehicles. We've got a couple of other vehicles here. Here's one that's just off to our left. Here's one that's turning in front of us. Okay, so the presence of other vehicles is always something that's really important. That's definitely one of the most important aspects of what's going on in this scenario. Another thing you might have picked, you might have selected that we have a green light here. So the presence of traffic controls. We have a traffic light, and more specifically, that light is currently green. What are some other things that you could have picked? Well, maybe you said, hey, you know what? Here's a pedestrian crosswalk, so I better be watching out for pedestrians. That's a great thing to identify. You could have also identified things about the road conditions. You know, we're definitely on a paved road. This road is paved. It looks a little overcast. Who knows? This road kind of looks a little bit wet, but that's pretty tough to tell from this picture. Okay. Other roadway users, identifying the presence of other roadway users. I don't know if you notice this or not, but right up here, this is a tougher one to identify, but there's a person that's, we assume, either getting into or getting out of this van that's parked on the side of the road. So that's something that you could have identified. And then additionally, we do have a speed limit sign here that tells us what our speed limit is. And we also have a sign up here that tells us what street we are crossing. Okay, so there's lots of really important stuff to identify there. Some things that maybe aren't all that important to identify are that, that we have a brick building here. Okay, I mean, not really important to our driving task. We've got some, I think it says realty company here. Maybe it's insurance. I'm not sure. Okay, so there's some stuff that's not all that important. You know, there's no leaves on the trees. So that tells us it's fall or winter. Not super important unless it affects road conditions. So all sorts of stuff that we can identify there. All right, let's take a look at another scenario. So here we have another one. Go ahead and pause the video and identify 3 things from this scenario. All right, so what 3 things did you identify? I would imagine that you identified our parked car with the person, it appears to be getting into the car right here. Hopefully you also identified that we have a stop sign here. We're coming up on a stop sign. And maybe you also identified that we're in a residential area, okay? And one thing about a residential area is that you always want to be watching for the presence of children, okay? Children specifically have a tendency to run out in the road after a ball or something like that, okay? We also have lots of driveways in a residential area, which means that we could have people coming out of driveways and maybe they don't notice the presence of your car. So some really good things for us to identify here in this picture. Let's go on to the next picture and see what we have. Hey, speaking of children running out in a road, go ahead and pause this and see what things from this video or from this picture you identify. Okay, I bet you identified the ball and the children over here on the side of the road. I can't think of anything in this picture that's more important than those 2 things. Because if we just continue driving along and those children come out in the road, we're going to have a problem. But there are other things here to identify as well. So we do have parked cars along the side of the road. Parked cars always present a possible conflict. So there's something that we want to identify. You might have identified that where our road is ending, we're coming up to a T intersection up here. You can see that our road is ending. And then also we do have here at the end of the road, it's a little hard to tell, but I think that's a yield sign. That looks like a triangle to me. I think that's a yield sign. So some good things to identify in this picture as well. Let's see if we've got another picture coming up here that we can identify some things. This eraser takes forever to erase. I paused that so you wouldn't have to watch me erase all of it. All right, let's see. I think we've got one more picture. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and identify 3 things in this image. Okay, maybe you identified that we've got a red traffic light. Maybe you identified that there's a lot of traffic here on this road. You might have also identified that the road appears to be wet and we have foggy conditions. So, all sorts of good things to identify there. Lots of information that is very important to our driving task. So that's identifying. But once we've identified things, so we've identified all this information that's important to us, the next step is even more important, and that's being able to do something with that knowledge. And the thing that we're going to do is we're going to predict. So we're going to predict the actions of other roadway users. We're going to predict the control of our own vehicle, and we're going to predict the consequences of our actions. If I do this, what will happen? If I don't do anything, what will happen? All those things are really important. So let's give that a try. So again, let's take a look and see what are the three things that we're predicting here? Well, we're predicting the actions of other roadway users. What do we think the drivers of other cars and the pedestrians on the road, what do we think these people are going to do? And then what do we think? How do we think our car is going to handle in this situation? And, what are the consequences if we do this or if we don't do anything? So let's go ahead and take a look at these. So whenever we're predicting, we specifically want to look at what are things that could be bad about this scenario. What possible conflict could arise or could occur? What could go wrong in this situation? So go ahead and take a look at the picture here and predict something that you think could go wrong. Well, if you specifically pointed out this car pulling in front of us and how that could cause us a problem, you're exactly right. If we don't change anything about the way we're driving, there's a good chance we're going to run into this car. You might have also predicted that this car off to the left could try to change lanes and move over into our lane, and that could cause a problem. And you might have also predicted that something could occur with this pedestrian up here, and you might have also predicted that this light could turn yellow or red. So all sorts of things that could be predicted here, and all of those things would be good predictions. Okay, let's take a look at this scenario. Go ahead and pause the video and predict the possible conflict that could arise here. What could go wrong in this scenario? Okay, what did you pick for possible conflicts that could arise? I would imagine that one of the things you talked about was the presence of this car and pedestrian right here. And that, some kind of conflict related to that. Maybe the person getting in the car and pulling out in front of you. Maybe, just the presence of that open door causing a problem. Another conflict you might talk about is the possibility of any of these driveways of another car pulling out in front of you, or maybe the possibility of a kid running out into the road. All sorts of things that we could predict on this picture. And all of those are pertinent to the driving task. Okay, take a second here and pick out conflicts that you would choose in this scenario. Okay, what did you pick? Did you pick the kids running out into the street after the ball? That's definitely a possible conflict. Or maybe even one of these doors on a parked car opening, or one of the parked cars pulling out in front of you, or maybe some other car pulling out from another driveway. All of those are possible conflicts that could arise. And then here, what about this final situation? What are some problems, some conflicts that could occur? Here, maybe you talked about the control of your vehicle. We've got all these cars that are stopped at the red light and the road looks a little slick. So what if you press on the brakes and your vehicle starts to slide? That's definitely a possible conflict that could occur. So now that we've talked about identifying and predicting, we've got two more steps to talk about, and those two steps are decide and execute. And we're going to talk about these together because otherwise it just seems a little redundant. They are actually separate steps, but one leads directly to the other. So, for example, the things that you could decide, one thing you could decide is to change speed. Well, if you're going to change speed, the way that you execute that, the way that you actually do that, is by either pressing on the accelerator to speed up or pressing on the brake to slow down. So that's your decide and execute. You could also decide to change direction. And so if you're going to decide to change direction, obviously the way to do that is you're going to steer the car. You're going to either do hand over hand or push-pull steering. And then finally, you might decide to communicate. Maybe you're going to activate a turn signal because you're going to turn. Maybe you're going to honk your horn. I'm not a big advocate of honking your horn in general, but there are situations where it is called for. Maybe you're going to put on your hazard lights or turn on your headlights or something like that. So that's your decide and execute steps. And you might guess what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at all three of those scenarios again, or I'm sorry, all four of those scenarios again, and talk about what would be the best decision and how would we execute that decision in these scenarios. So here, looking at the image in front of us, go ahead and pause it and think about what you would do and how you would do it. Okay, so all sorts of things happening here. The best thing to do in this situation is to slow down a little bit, okay? Right? We've got a car turning in front of us. We've got this car that's awfully close to us. We got a pedestrian up here. Even though we've got a green light, we're close enough that we're going to make it through the intersection. But if we just ease off the gas or even press on the brake a little bit, that'd be the execute part. That will allow us to slow down, which is the right decision. And you might even say, based on the presence of this person up here getting into the van, maybe you would even switch lanes and get over into the left lane. That's something you could do as well. And if you're going to do that, you're going to need to activate a turn signal. You're going to need to check your mirrors and blind spot. And then you're going to need to change lanes. Once you're through the intersection, you can't change lanes in an intersection. Okay, so here's another scenario. What are we going to decide and how are we going to do it? So pause the video and think about that and then resume it and we'll talk about it. Okay, did you decide to slow down and scoot over to go around this car? Did you decide to, watch out, keep an eye out for pedestrians or other cars? If you decided to do those things, then that's really good. Okay, and the way you execute that is if you were going to go around this car, you'd want to check your mirrors, you'd put your left turn signal on, you'd pull over into the other lane, then you'd put your right turn signal on and come back into the proper lane. That's how you'd go around that car, and then obviously you're just going to be keeping an eye on things after that. All right, what would be your decision in this situation and how would you execute that decision? What did you decide? Did you decide to slow down and stop? That way the kids can come out in the road and get the ball. Maybe you decided to motion them out to say, hey, it's okay. I see you. Go ahead and go get the ball. Or maybe you decided to slow down and kind of keep an eye on the kids. And if they run out in front of you, maybe you're going to honk at them a little bit to say, hey, kids, remember you should watch the road before you go running out into it, kind of like a friendly reminder of, watch out for traffic. Maybe you decided to put your left blinker on and slow way down and go slowly around this ball and the kids. As long as you are paying extra special care to these children and making sure that you give them plenty of room so that you don't come anywhere close to them. For me, if I were in this situation, I would just go ahead and stop and let the kids come out in the ball and get the road. I wouldn't try to even go around it slowly because you never know. They might run up there to get the ball and they might accidentally bump it with their foot and now it rolls in front of you. It's just not worth the risk. Give them 15, 20 seconds out of your life so they can go get that ball. All right, this situation, take a couple of seconds here to think about what you're going to do and then resume the video. So, what did you decide? Did you decide to slow down gradually so that you don't skid into this car in front of you? And if so, did you put your foot on the brake gently and make sure you leave plenty of room between you and the car in front? If that's what you decided, good job, because that's the right thing to do in this situation. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this IPDE process that we've just used. One thing to know is that the IPDE process takes practice. So, it's like anything else. The more you use it, the better you're going to get at it. And now is actually a great time to practice it. Don't just ride around with your parents. Be thinking through these situations even when you're not the driver. That's going to help you when you are the driver. We took, I don't know how long it's been now, maybe 15 minutes going through those various pictures. And we split it up into individual steps. Out in the real world, you don't get that kind of time. Stuff happens fast and all the steps are combined, right? So you've got to identify, predict, decide, and execute all in a matter of just a couple of seconds, all right? So it's combined and it's continual, meaning it's just ongoing all the time. The situation's constantly changing. You have to constantly be evaluating and making predictions and decisions, and it's an ongoing thing. Okay. So you never get to take a break while you're driving. You always have to be paying attention and thinking. The IPD process takes time. And the more complex the situation, the more time it takes to work the process. That's why it's a good idea to start your driving in less complex situations and then work your way up. It's not a great idea to start driving by just driving down to St. Louis. Okay. That's pretty complex. Save that for once you get a little more experience. Okay, so a few other things for us to talk about here. Here, I'll find room for me down here. There we go. So the IPD process is designed to keep you in a safe path. We want your car in a safe path, and that's the same that we want for everybody out there on the roads. So by using the IPD process, that should place you in a safe path of travel. How do we know if we have a safe path of travel? The way that we know that we have a safe path of travel is we're able to see, so we have good visibility. Our car has good traction, so we're on good pavement. We're not losing control of our vehicle. We have plenty of space around us so that if we need to move away from some hazard, we have the room to do that. And we're in a position where we have good traffic flow. Okay, we're able to drive down the road. We don't have obstructions in front of us. And so those four things are the requirements for maintaining a safe path of travel. So, visibility. We talked about visibility as one of the four things for a safe path of travel. Well, visibility is hugely important to the driving task. 90% of the traffic information you gather is through your eyes. You get some information from feel of driving the car. You get a little bit of information from hearing. You might hear someone honk, or you might hear an emergency vehicle like a police officer or an ambulance or something with their sirens on. But 90% of the information that you gather is through your eyes. Where there is limited visibility, you're not able to identify possible hazards. So it's really important to keep yourself in a situation where you have good visibility. Some terminology that will help us understand different types of visibility. Sight distance, that's literally the distance you can see ahead. So that's affected by just your own personal ability to see. Some people have better vision than others. It's also affected by time of day. If the sun is shining in your face, that can kind of reduce your visibility, or if it's dark out, then you're limited by your headlights, or if it's foggy or rainy or things like that, that's going to affect your visibility. Your sight distance, how far out in front of you can see. Your field of vision, that's not just how far you can see in front, but how well can you see all around you, the area you can see while you're looking straight ahead. So it's talking about your peripheral vision. How far out to the side can you see? And then depth perception, that's your ability to judge distance between yourself and other things. Are you good at telling how far away something is from you? So all three of those things have an impact on our vision. or different parts, different facets of our vision. Traction. We've talked before about traction, how important it is. Traction is literally the gripping power between your tires and the road surface. It's a form of friction. Things that are going to affect negatively the amount of traction you have are wet roads or icy roads. If your tires don't have much tread left on them, they're pretty worn out. If you have loose gravel, if you have a bumpy road, if you've got snow or anything like that, all of those things are going to reduce your traction. When your traction is reduced, you also have to reduce speed. So reduced traction equals reduced speed. Slow that vehicle down. And then space. What do we do to make sure that we have enough space? Well, that's up to you. You've got to position yourself in a way that you have space. So allow room for escape when stopped at a traffic control device. When you pull up behind someone else at a traffic control device, you want to make sure that you leave yourself enough space to get out. I'm going to back up a few pictures here. This is a good example right here. So if we were pulling up behind this car, we would want to make sure that we could stop in a position where we can still see where their back tires touch the road. If we pull up and we can't see where their back tires touch the road, then we are too close to them and we're not leaving enough space in traffic. And keep all four zones clear. We're talking about our front zone, our rear zone, our left zone, and our right zone. Keep those four zones clear, and that allows you room to maneuver around any potential hazard. Traffic flow. The safest position in traffic is where the fewest vehicles and other objects surround you. And so there are three techniques for managing traffic flow. One's called separating hazards, one's called minimizing a hazard, and one's called compromise space. And so let's look at those three things. So here we have the concept of separate hazards. So we have two separate hazards here. Here's one hazard, this truck coming towards us, and here's another hazard, these pedestrians. And so the idea of separating a hazard is that if we can, we don't want to encounter these two hazards at the same time. So what we can do is we can slow down or even stop right here and let the truck go by, okay? Once the truck goes by, then we can pull out and go around these pedestrians. And that separates the two hazards. Now we don't have to encounter those two hazards at the same time. Now, minimizing a hazard. You can already tell a little bit from the arrow here, but let's talk about this. So what is the hazard in this scenario? I know this is just a diagram, but here let's pretend that we're in the yellow car. Well, our biggest hazard right now are these parked cars on the side of the road. Parked cars are always hazardous because you never know when one's going to pull out or somebody's going to open a door or some pedestrian's going to walk out in between the cars. Okay, so to minimize that hazard, to make that hazard less hazardous, we're just going to scoot closer to the center line so that we give extra space between us and the cars. That's minimizing a hazard. And then finally, compromise space. So here we're in a situation where we can't separate the hazards. We've got two hazards, the semi-truck and these cars. We can't separate them. We would like to minimize the hazard of these parked cars, but we've got an even greater hazard, this semi-truck. And we can see this semi-truck is moving over because a car is starting to pull out. So we've got to do something that we don't really want to do. We've got to move closer to these parked cars. So we are going to take a look at our two hazards. Our biggest hazard is the semi, and our lesser hazard is the parked cars. So we're going to use something called compromise space. We're going to give up the safety zone of leaving space between us and the parked cars, and we're going to go ahead and move closer to them. And that's going to be our compromise. We're going to say, all right, we definitely don't want to hit this semi, so we'll move closer to the parked cars because they're less of a hazard. So that's the idea of compromise space. Okay, well, hey, I hope you learned something about being a safe driver today. And the key takeaway here is that driving is a thinking activity. You've got to be looking around you and identifying all the important stuff. You've got to be making predictions about what can go wrong, and then you've got to make decisions about how to handle those situations and go ahead and execute the decisions. So there you go, the IPD process, a safe driving system, all wrapped up for you in one neat little lecture. So thank you guys for tuning in today. I hope you learned something. Hope you got something out of this lecture. But even if you didn't, just like my favorite professor, Dr. Phillips, used to say, it's better than a sharp stick in the eye. We'll see you.